All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next session of Tooth to Nail with Chris Bonnello. I hope you're all doing well. And before we start, how are you, Chris?
Yeah, things are good. Thank you. I've decided to take it a bit slower with work this week, and I it's 6:30 in the evening, and I don't feel exhausted. So yay!
And that's good. That's good to hear.
Mm.
We all need a little bit of break every few months
Yep.
and stuff. So
Mm.
that's good. Okay. So just a quick recap of what we did in the last session, the last chapter, and then we'll start from there. How does this sound?
Okay. Oh, the last session we had was basically the end of the first half's action, where the escape from Oakenfold finally ended, and everyone who survived Oakenfold managed to get home. Uh, I think it was last month where we had that epic fight between Jack and Gracie versus the three Alex clones, which I is one of my personal favorite chapters of the whole series. And after
Yeah.
they get back, they think, well, Alex's clones seem to know their way specifically to that house. So where else do they remember the way to? So their current belief is that, well, it's only a matter of time until Alex's clones point out where Spitfire's rise is, so they've got to evacuate. And on the plus side, when they got home, McCormick's operation went completely fine. Uh, well, I say completely fine. His abdomen is a complete mess because it was sealed up with a soldering iron, but the sister's out, which means good news. He can take part in the action in the second half of the book, and he's oh yeah, and they're doing an experiment on Alex just to confirm that he's not a clone. They basically sliced his cheek, like giving him a scar to distinguish him from his other clones,
Mhm.
and they're going to see what happens to his blood over the following few hours. And that's the very last thing that happened in the previous chapter. They're having this test on Alex, and the book in general is having a bit of a rest after the absolute chaos that we've spent most of the previous 11 chapters having so far. Anyway, now let's see what things look like inside the outer city of New London.
Well, I'm
Right,
excited to find out.
right, chapter 12. Oliver Roth lumbered down the floor A corridor, exhausted from his all-night journey back to the Citadel. It was rare that he saw grass or sunlight these days, but he realised how little he had missed them. New London held everything he was truly interested in, and he had no idea how the rebels could live such unluxurious lives in the countryside. Well, the ones that are left, anyway, he thought, as his prize rolled and thumped around in his backpack. Despite Roth's tiredness, his enthusiasm remained. He had walked from Harpenden to Florey without even sitting down along the 15-mile journey, kept on his feet by the thought of later boasting about the achievement, and his allies awaited him behind the next door for a meeting that apparently couldn't be delayed any longer. Rather than being demotivated, Roth was consumed with excitement. Through the glass wall of the office, he could see Marshall and Pierce sitting at opposite sides of the long table, predictably distant from each other. At the front of the room, a large screen displayed the same countdown as every other spare screen on floor A at that moment. 34:01:21, 34:01:20, 34:01:19. The numbers were digital shaped and bright red, like the countdowns on those bombs from the movies. It seemed a childish choice, but nobody was going to offer that feedback to Nicholas Grant. Certainly not the dull-mannered duo sitting at the elongated table. At one end, Ian Marshall sat hunched in his seat with a face like a smacked arse. That's a very British phrase, by the way, but I'm pretty sure that it translates. At the opposite end, Nathaniel Pierce was tucking into his brunch, his little too happy smile visible even with his mouth full. The sight of cheese and jalapenos forced an involuntary rolling of Roth's eyes. There could have been a whole food laboratory growing those jalapeno peppers for Pierce, and Roth didn't trust the common sense of a man who guzzled spicy food before midday. Then again, he thought, of all the reasons we have to distrust Nat, his jalapenos are pretty bloody far down the list. Marshall had told him everything. Back in Roth's training days, when Marshall hadn't seen his 12-year-old apprentice as a possible future threat, the man had spent a lot of time ranting about his colleague and former best friend. Oh yeah, I just realised that you've known for like a book and a half that Marshall and Pierce don't like each other, but I think this is the only time where it actually specifies why. After a dozen years in the armed forces and 8 as an international arms dealer, Marshall had thought it better to quit the latter profession while he was still alive. He had told Roth that it was a sensible, calculated decision, like every decision that needed to be made during combat. But Roth had seen through him, and he knew that weak arms dealers didn't merely lose money when their influence started to wane. Marshall had left his exciting war zones and fled back to regular, boring Britain, got himself married to a regular, boring woman, and started a regular, boring job at a private defence contractor with a regular, boring name, Marshall Contractors. Roth couldn't remember the technical details and didn't care about them either, but he remembered that Marshall Contractors became Marshall Pierce Solutions when his boss's old university roommate failed at his own business. Pierce's pharmaceutical company had been a casualty of Britain's worst economic downturn in 30 years. Although his terrible business sense hadn't helped either, according to a ranting Marshall. Marshall had created a senior staff position for his old friend, allowing the near-bankrupted Pierce to desert his sinking ship 2 months before the rest of his company collapsed into dust. It had gone well for a while, until a man called Nicholas Grant wandered in and bought their company in a day. It was, "Well, there's Oliver," came Marshall's voice from the other side of the thin glass. Roth brought himself back to reality and scanned his keycard against the door. He scurried through it as it opened, making his remaining energy as visible to his superiors as he could. "Made it with 55 seconds to go," said Pierce. "Adults always start their meetings late," Roth said, dumping his rucksack on the floor next to his chair. "Besides, you may be 3 minutes from your bedroom, but I had to walk here from Harpenden. Made it without sitting down along the way, you know." Before Roth could check their faces for reactions, the countdown on the television flickered off. The screen turned pure white, and a monotone buzz of blank noise suggested Grant's microphone was on. "Oh, he's not showing his face. For all we know, he could be sitting at his desk in his underwear, playing chess against himself or something. Or maybe he thinks a blank screen is more imposing." Roth understood. Reputation was far scarier than a visible face. Marshall had once taught him that. "Let us begin," came the voice of Nicholas Grant. "Great timing," said Roth. "I've just arrived. But of course you knew that, didn't you?" "Perceptive boy. Yes, I was watching." Roth tried to look around for wherever the camera was, without it being obvious he was searching. He felt more comfortable knowing which part of his head was being watched by the world's most controlling dictator. "Hungry, Nathaniel?" asked Grant. Roth's glance landed on Pierce as he swallowed his mouthful of cheese and jalapenos. "I've got to eat here," he said. "Hope you don't mind. Struggling to find time for nourishment with the AME project where it is." "Lose the sandwich, Nathaniel," Grant boomed. "What you're doing is a transparent attempt to impress me with how busy you are, and I'm not gullible enough to fall for it." "Unless you think I am?" "No, sir," Pierce answered. "I don't." Pierce's trademark smile collapsed at the edges, and he placed the cheese and jalapeno sandwich on the table. "Bin, Nathaniel." There was a moment of beautifully awkward silence as Pierce's smile dropped even further. At the other end of the table, Marshall wore his poker face to conceal how amusing he must have found the telling off. Roth didn't bother and openly snorted with laughter. Nathaniel Pierce, pharmaceuticals genius and creator of the clone soldier, picked up his sandwich and walked over to the corner bin like a naughty primary school child. With his brunch thrown away, he sauntered back to the table and sat down, trying not to look too embarrassed. "Now," said Roth in his most jovial voice, "where were we?" "First things first," said Grant's voice. "Talk to me about the results from the AME test centre." Otherwise known as Oakenfold Retard School, thought Roth. "Things are looking rather positive," said Pierce. "You've had a day and a half to sift through your results," said Grant. "I want more than rather positive. Based on the performance of atmospheric metallurgic excitation at the test location, I can confirm a near 100% likelihood of success when we apply the same technology on a larger scale, to an area the size of New London Citadel, for example." Pierce continued with scientific terms that Roth did not understand. The longer the chief scientist's monologue, the more sour the expression on Marshall's face. Roth thought back once again to those rants of old, about how Ian Marshall's best mate from university had stopped existing under the leadership of Nicholas Grant, replaced by a creepy smiler who used big words to impress important people. A man who had vanished into the lab for days on end, stopped heading to the Red Lion for a pint at the weekends, and even ignored Marshall's social calls. Roth wondered whether they could have been reconciled when Grant finally sat them down and told them about his plans for Great Britain. But Marshall had screwed it up catastrophically, and Roth was glad. "Ian," said Grant. "Anything to add?" Roth looked to the ceiling and found the camera. At his side, Marshall was still searching, as subtly as he could. "No," Marshall replied. "I think Nat covered it neatly. If I may talk for a moment about the rebels, I don't care about them. They're 35 hours from being irrelevant. You do care about them, thought Roth. Otherwise, you wouldn't have hosted the AME tests at Oakenfold. Oh, and there's also the Ginelli project. Something unspecified about Alex. Oh, yeah, and your daughter. Looking at Marshall's face, he had clearly had the same thought. Shannon's still with them, sir, Marshall said. The destruction of the clone factory proves it. They used Lambourne's technology, which they could only have got from her. And how many of them are left exactly? It was your idea to lure them to the test centre. Did it work? Hargreaves and Simmons died as expected, Marshall finished. But I'm led to believe we got one of them. The clone teams further afield reported no further kills. Oliver? Roth grinned. Time to shine. He reached into the rucksack next to his chair as he spoke. Yep, he started. Another one down. I arrived at the test centre last night and confirmed it myself. If you want to see how effective the AME shield is, take a look at this. Roth brought his hand out from his rucksack and dumped a thick, red-stained forensic evidence bag onto the table. Marshall's eyebrows rose to the top of his head. Even Pierce, no stranger to gore in the laboratory, opened his mouth so wide that Roth could smell the jalapenos. The head inside the evidence bag was of Indian descent. It had young skin and eyes that were squeezed shut. Roth was looking forward to researching the dead kid's name once the meeting ended. Bloody hell, Oliver, came Marshall's voice. As you can see, Roth said, the shield works. This lad had metal implants in his spine. Well, I'm guessing he did, given the state of his remains. You realise, said Grant's voice with a low chuckle, that mutilating the deceased is against the Geneva Convention? And that includes decapitation. Decapitation? There was only a flap of skin holding it on when I found it. Now, the best part is, the rest of his crew might have been watching when this happened. This guy's body will be one hell of a deterrent for them. Raising the AME shield won't just stop them from getting in. It will stop them from even thinking about it. Roth inspected the head on the table next to him. The jaw was broken, suggesting it may have had metal teeth fillings too. A forensic analyst would have had so much fun looking at his remains. Bringing a severed head to a meeting, said Marshall. This is a new one, Oliver. You're not grossed out, are you? No, just worried about your well-being. I'm doing better than him, don't worry. Roth's grin was not returned, not even by Pierce. Oliver, replied Marshall, there's no point in having unbridled enthusiasm if it's counteracted by an enormous lack of judgment. A soldier must be objective and rational and not waste time delighting in personal pleasures. And could you please stop drumming your fingers on Raj's head while I'm talking to you? Raj, so that was his name. Roth stared at Marshall in the eyes, his expression an unwavering vision of confidence. As predicted, Marshall pushed the conversation no further. It was a wonderful skill, his ability to shut up his boss whenever he wanted. The beautiful part was that the reason behind this ability was never spoken aloud, but always on both their minds. Marshall and Pierce must have been in that same meeting room the day Grant had shared his ultimate plan. Marshall, thinking of his young family in the Derbyshire Dales, or so the story went, had been horrified. Inspired by the risk to Hannah and his twin daughters, apparently, who would be doomed to grow up and grow old in New London's upper floors, as if that would be a bad thing, Marshall had reached into the company's private army training program and pulled out a red-haired teenager. Oliver Gabriel Roth, then aged 12, was set to burst out of comprehensive school 4 years later with a fine assortment of high grades. He had planned to enter the military, but a place in the British Armed Forces didn't offer half as much money as a private defence contractor, and to a young man with unsupportive parents, money mattered. Roth remembered Marshall's reasons for choosing him. Apparently, he had seen a battling attitude, raw, unbridled enthusiasm, and a total reliance on victory for his sense of self-worth, according to an email on his computer that Roth hadn't been meant to look at. Despite Roth's young age and lack of experience, Marshall was convinced there was nobody on his payroll more suitable for the assassination of Nicholas Grant. From the beginning, Roth had known the reasons for his promotion. He had even met his targets face-to-face and shook Grant by the hand. The private education promised to the authorities was a lie, replaced by intensive military training. By his 13th birthday, he'd been going to bed each night twirling the child-proof bottle of cyanide tablets between his fingers, waiting with growing impatience for the signal to slip them into Grant's morning coffee. The signal never came. Marshall had never admitted it, but Roth knew his boss had accepted that his own fate relied on the success of Nicholas Grant. But by calling off Grant's assassination, Marshall had surrendered his fate to a teenage boy too. Roth had never blackmailed him aloud, and he had never needed to. Even that day, with Britain subdued and the war nearly won, a cheeky smile on his face told Marshall everything he needed to know. To buy his silence, Oliver Roth had been swept into a life of luxury on Floor A and total freedom from authority. 1 year on from takeover day, the relationship between the Big Four was complicated. Each one of them was hated by each of the others, but their animosity was rarely committed to words. There was an unspoken wobbly tension between them, like a wooden raft tied with loose rope, but they depended on one another for survival. Roth drummed his fingers on top of the forensic bag one more time and smiled at Marshall. "If Ian's finished being offended," said Grant, "we need to discuss the tasks that need completing outside of New London. After that, I believe we're done here. What needs doing, gentlemen?" "How about the external backups I've been requesting?" asked Marshall. "The sooner this technology is sent to other citadels, the safer we'll be." "You'll have them," answered Grant, "but not tonight, and we've already been through why." "Why?" asked Roth, not content with being out of the loop. "Because you're talking about whole chambers full of very large pieces of equipment and data so complex it can't simply be emailed. The sheer volume of it all can only be transported across 2 lanes of empty motorway, which we no longer have anywhere on this island, or via huge freight trains, which are no longer powered. We'll be able to fit it all on the Sheila, but she won't be ready for another few weeks." Roth smiled at the thought of the Sheila coming into use. It'll be a long while after this day had ended, maybe in Book 3. But it was sure to be beautiful once she embarked upon her maiden voyage. "In the meantime," said Pierce, "there are still resources from the test centre that need bringing here. Research papers, computers, and the like." "Sorry to break it to you," Roth said, his sympathy clearly limited, "but a quarter of the retard school was burned to a crisp when I arrived. A bunch of that stuff will be gone. This guy must have started a fire before he killed himself," he finished, patting the top of Ryder's head and looking to Marshall for a reaction. "Then we'll search through the other 3 quarters," answered Pierce. "The school's safely trapped behind a shield," said Roth. "Why spend time and resources getting anything back?" "Because," Pierce said with an irritated sigh, "someone in their crew might only need to remove their metal earrings to have free access to any surviving research. Some of the paperwork may have been destroyed in the fire, but I want everything else brought back here." "Fine," Marshall butted in. "I'll send out some transport. I'll need to bring the shield down, though." "You can do that remotely from the AME computer in your office," said Pierce. "I'll tell you when." "Sort it out between you," said Grant. "Anything else that needs doing outside these walls?" Roth shrugged and hoped his colleagues would do the same. There was a bed in his room not far away that awaited his attention. "There's a weapons cache out towards Beaconsfield," said Marshall, "left over from the days of using quarries as drop-off points between citadels. Better to bring those weapons inside so they don't fall into rebel hands. Start right away. It will take until tomorrow evening, but I'll start as soon as this meeting is over." "Then it's over. Keep in touch." The white screen reverted back to its countdown, and the background noise from Grant's microphone fell silent. The meeting was over, and not a moment too soon. Pierce wasted no time in heading to the door, and Roth caught the man's eyes gazing forlornly at the bin as he passed it. "Right," said Roth, grabbing the forensic bag in one hand and stuffing it back into his rucksack. "It's been a lovely morning, but I need some sleep. Wake me up when something interesting happens." "Oliver," said Marshall, "a word, please." "Twat, that's a word." "Out in the corridor now." Sorry. Roth rose to his feet. Roth rose to his feet and laughed. "Why not in here? Because you're afraid Nick's still listening? Oh, and hi, Nick, if you are." Marshall didn't say another word. He walked to the door, grabbing Roth by the shoulder as he passed, tight enough to show his impatience, but not tight enough to make it seem aggressive. He took Roth out of the office, found an empty stretch of corridor, and stood him against the wall. "Sadism, severed heads, and cavalier bad judgment. Not cool, Oliver." "Do you have any idea how much I cringe when an adult tries to use the word cool?" "My language is not the problem here, Oliver. An experienced war veteran is giving you combat advice, and you should bloody well listen to it." "Go on then, bloody well advise me." "However much you hate an enemy, you can't veer from your military training. That's how they win. Even if you despise them with all the passion in your whole being, you still dispatch them with tactical cunning and ruthless rationality. What you don't do is give in to mindless impulses which tell you to indulge in sadism and self-entertainment, like carving off a dead enemy's head just for a trophy." Marshall took a step back. Until then, Roth had neither noticed nor cared how close Marshall had been to his face. His boss's words had been predictable. Roth had spent many meetings listening to Marshall's lectures about logical approaches and strategic brutality. But brutality wrapped in logic was still brutality, and Roth felt that his personal investment in his work added to its effectiveness rather than dulled it. "The younger version of you used to know all that," Marshall continued. "This last year, you've started to lose the sensible, measured determination I used to admire in you. You're on dangerous ground, and you can't even blame it on puberty hitting you like a ton of bricks. No, I can't," Roth interrupted. "I'm blaming it on you." While Marshall took time to react, Roth took the opportunity to steal the initiative. "If you think I'm a monster you created. I still played Pokemon when I was 12. And if you hadn't promoted me as quick as you did, for the reasons you had, Maybe I'd still be that friendly, ambitious kid now and still be playing bloody Pokemon. It was the closest Roth had ever come to directly referencing Marshall's extinct assassination plan. He would go no further. Not today. There was a momentary twinge of fear in Marshall's face before he replaced it with predictable anger. Nobody goes through what I did without becoming what I've become, Roth finished. You made sure of that. You're wrong, Oliver. Everything you became is what you wanted to become. Did you want to become a miserable authoritarian moron then? Or a failed arms dealer? I made my own choices and I know who I am. Do you know who you really are, Oliver? Well, I'm sure you're going to enlighten me either way, so stop wasting my time and go ahead. Marshall's top lip began to quiver and his face turned red. There was just a little part of him that seemed tempted to lose control, a sub-personality that within him that looked like it wanted to throw his own advice out of the window. Oliver, he began, you are the result of a perfect storm of bad circumstances, apathetic parents, enormous opportunity, and a complete lack of boundaries. And those circumstances have tricked you into thinking that no matter how little self-discipline you have, the world will just accommodate your errors of judgment. You are the school bully who never grew up to learn that the real world doesn't care how cool you were as a teenager. You are the one person on earth who has been given everything he ever wanted, and it has destroyed any possibility of you growing up to be a good man. But at the very bloody least, Oliver, be a decent soldier. Oliver Gabriel Roth might have been impacted by that little speech if he had not had the defense barriers up in his mind. He gave no reaction. Don't you have a wife you're pretending to care about back in your apartment? He asked. I'm sure she misses you and is pretending to care about you too. Marshall rolled his eyes and turned away. Roth knew, alongside so many other details about his boss's life, that his relationship with Hannah and the kids had gone cold long ago. Still, he imagined that coldness was more comforting than the searing hot hatred of his colleagues. As his boss and former mentor walked back towards his apartment, Roth checked up and down the corridor for witnesses. Since there were none, neither Ian Marshall nor anyone else saw the double middle fingers pointed up towards his back as he walked. End of chapter 12.
I kind of really like Oliver's character. The sarcasm and everything, it's just perfect.
Oh, yeah. Despite everything, he is possibly one of my... he's among my favourite characters for the wrong reasons. I mean, as the series goes on, you expand on... the books expand on what Marshall basically just said about how Roth became the person he became, and I think his character is actually quite tragic, but it's difficult to notice, especially in the first couple of books, it's difficult to notice because you're just so distracted by just how brutal he is. And I was reading that and thinking, wow, I'd actually forgotten exactly just how much of a madman Oliver Roth is.
Now, this chapter really showed his true, personality. And so I do believe you... Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I just didn't hear that sentence.
No, I was just saying this particular chapter really showed his personality out there. And I think you kind of mentioned his past as well and the way he was brought up, a little bit of it. So we kind of get an idea. But I'm pretty sure we'll get a better idea in the next couple of chapters in the next book.
Yeah, but basically, I suppose what I ended up aiming for with Oliver Roth is that maybe it's a reflection of my beliefs about people and what ordinary, regular people can be like if they don't have positive role models. That I don't think that Oliver Roth was born to be the villain. He wasn't born bad or anything. He was just a regular 12-year-old lad whose parents just saw him as kind of chewing gum stuck to the side of the family rather than giving him that sense of belonging. And and I believe that that's regular, typical, neurotypical in Oliver Roth's case, 12-year-old boys are not invincible from becoming monsters if they hang around the wrong crowd, which is with apologies for referencing the riots going on in Britain right now. It is alarming seeing 12, 13, 14-year-olds being involved in it who probably, in my opinion, certainly weren't born to be bad guys either. But
that's true.
Yeah, I'm worried that they can be corrupted as easily as Oliver Roth is corrupted. But at the same time, how much sympathy do you feel for the corrupted young person when they're busy bringing severed heads to meeting and shooting Charlie Coleman in the chest?
Not a lot, but then I feel like it's really important. So personally, I'm a psychology student, right? So for me,
Yeah.
I would have to look through all the life history and like things that could have potentially caused him to be the way he is. And that kind of
Mm.
makes sense. But as a regular person, it would be like, "Oh, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing all of this?" Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a very thin line between the sympathy and the not being too
Yeah.
sympathetic towards him.
There was a Facebook status or a picture on Facebook I saw some years ago, which said something like, "Oh, I hate having had lots of experience in psychology because now instead of just thinking, oh, that person's a twat, I empathise with them too much."
That's true. That's very true. It happens. You can't really stop yourself from doing that.
Hmm.
That's true. Hey, exciting time for next. Um, are we on for chapter 13?
I am if you are.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, back to Spitfire's Rise. Even when Spitfire's Rise had been crowded, Ewan's bedroom had always been a sanctuary. It would not remain that way for much longer. Once he walked out of the bedroom, he would never return to it, regardless of whether or not they won. Ewan could not remember the last time he had felt so frustrated and insecure inside Spitfire's Rise. It was probably back in the early days during a temper twin incident with Charlie, or maybe even on Takeover Day itself, when he was frightened enough to shoot. "Ewan?" came a friendly voice from outside the bedroom. Ewan turned his head to the door and found Shannon poking her face inside. Once she saw that the bedroom was unoccupied except for him, she walked in and sat down beside him on the bed. "You all right?" Ewan asked. "Yeah, I'm no stranger to this," Shannon replied, her face to the floor. "This is the third time I've had to run away in the last month. Abandoning New London with Anthony Lambourne, getting taken from the clinic by Keith Tyler, and now fleeing Spitfire's Rise. Pretty much my whole life has involved running away from things." Ewan sighed. Shannon had only been with them for 3 weeks, and the house already meant as much to her as it did to him. Normally that would annoy him. How could her mere three weeks of attachment possibly compare to his year minus 2 days? But somehow Ewan was fine with her sharing his feelings. "Are you busy?" she asked. "I thought you were packing, or just pretending to be," Ewan answered. "Needed some time to myself. I'm fine with you being here, though." "Are you okay?" "No." "Can I help?" "No." "Do you mean that, or are you just frustrated?" Ewan paused. His second no had been automatic, and she had caught him out. He was sitting next to the best possible person to help, the only underdog who had ever seen the uppermost floors of New London. "Well," he answered, "I suppose if you have any tips for getting past floor F, I'm listening." Floor F was the highest accessible story from regular stairwells. According to the stolen schematics, the stairwells only connected neighbouring floors after that. One stairwell from F to E, a separate one from E to D, and so on. According to the papers Raj had found at Oakenfold, some of the AME technology was kept as high as floor B. "Make sure you have keycards ready," Shannon answered. "Human keycards. Clones can't go higher than floor F unless humans let them up there." Ewan held his face and swore into his hands. Humans were rarely found below floor F, which complicated things even further. "And don't make anything personal," she added. "You'll want to, but don't. If my father or Oliver Roth is right in front of you, don't waste any time thinking about your dead family. Just keep calm and take the shot, no matter how much they try to wind you up." Oliver Roth's pretty good at winding me up, he thought. The way I fought him after Charlie died, I'm amazed he didn't kill me. "Thanks, Shannon," he said. "I think that'll help." She leaned in for what Ewan thought was a hug, but she ended up heading for his face. Before Ewan could react, he was being kissed. Ewan had never kissed anyone and meant it. During his younger teenage years, he had had casual girlfriends who had kissed because he was supposed to, but none of them cared like Shannon did. It was a kiss that had real affection in it, from a girl who truly liked him. It felt like it lasted for 10 whole seconds, but it could have been 20. Or 1. It was difficult to tell. When Shannon pulled away again, her face was red. "Sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have done that." "Wow, thanks." "Why not?" he asked. "Things are complicated," she answered, rising to her feet. "That's all." "Yeah, you just snogged the guy who's leading the charge against your dad. I thought you'd enjoy doing that." "I did. I just..." Whatever the true reason was for her reluctance, she wasn't planning to say it, but Ewan could guess. "You're afraid that once I go to New London, I won't come back, or we'll lose and the war will be over." Shannon didn't say a word. For what it's worth, he continued, it terrifies me too. I'm not going to lie, success isn't likely. If there's a single mission in the history of the Underdogs we're likely to fail, it's this one. Shannon headed for the bedroom door and yanked it open. You need to brush up on your comforting skills, she said as she stormed out. You'll need them for when you get a girlfriend one day. Girlfriend? The door slammed shut. Ewan decided not to waste time trying to decipher what Shannon meant. He had already avoided the downstairs gathering for too long. After waiting long enough for Shannon to have had a decent head start, Ewan left his bedroom for the final time and headed for the living room. All of his housemates were present, but he was struck by how empty the room felt. The 11 of them were only a third of the house's wartime residents. Not long after takeover day, McCormick had stood in the same spot and delivered a rousing speech to more than 30 people, who had all cheered and whooped at the idea of fighting back against Nicholas Grant and his million clones. Most of that crowd had since died, many in combat, some through illness, and poor Mike Ambrose had killed himself. The remaining underdogs, 6 special needs students, an old man, an aging nurse, a child, the dictator's daughter, and a man who had since been cloned, were a pathetic army by comparison. Ewan found Alex in the corner of the room, with the right-hand side of his face concealed against the wall. It will take him a while to get used to his 3-inch scar, but he was in the cellar with everybody else, and no one seemed to avoid him. Presumably, they'd all been told the result of the test, that Alex's blood had coagulated normally, which meant he was as human as everyone else in the room. Ewan, said McCormick, we were just sharing our favourite memories of this house. I thought it would be a nice way of ending things before you leave. Why don't you join us? Save it, Ewan answered. If we're leaving, we'd better do it now rather than later. We can wait until nightfall. Come on, share your own. Ewan wanted to respond with something that would kill the mood. Maybe the time he and Jack got drunk in the cellar after Oliver Roth had murdered David and Val Riley, or stumbling across Mike Ambrose's body in the generator room, or anything that involved friends who had suffered horrible deaths. But he restrained himself. McCormick's own emotions must have been unsteady. This house meant more to him than anyone else. It may legally have been Polly Jones's place, but for years it had been McCormick's home too. Ewan knew what his favourite memory was, but it wasn't one he could declare aloud. It was his favourite moment for strategic reasons rather than blind sentiment. It had been on takeover day, when the clones had come to raid Spitfire's Rise, burst through the door, and left without incident. He and McCormick had shouted upstairs, having seen the platoon approach from a distance. The soldiers had entered, seen Polly Jones's dead body, and left with the assumption that the house had already been raided. Not long afterwards, the clones had left the village altogether, allowing Ewan to leave the house and tell his friends about the shelter he had found. In all the time that had passed since then, none of the underdogs had been told that McCormick had been a resident at the house all along, or that Polly existed. I guess he won't have to keep it a secret much longer. Once we're gone from here, we can afford to let people know the truth. Then he can be thanked properly for taking us in. Then again, maybe not. Once the secret's out, we lose the chance to ever use this place again. My favourite thing, said Thomas, presumably for the 5th time in the conversation, was when Mum told McCormick off for farting at dinner, and he just answered her with another fart. Ewan leaned against the wall and gave a reluctant smile. If the conversation gave Thomas a chance to talk about his dead mother and laugh, perhaps it wasn't such a bad idea. Roseanne was nice, said Jack, referring to a lady in her 70s who had passed away long ago. She gave a nice old lady vibe to the place that I don't think we've had since. No offence, Lorraine. The room went ooh and gave nervous laughs in response. Lorraine, aged only 52, clattered him round the back of the head. Okay, said Jack, let's move on quickly. What's yours, McCormick? Honestly, McCormick replied, I think mine might be the night Shannon arrived. Shannon, sitting on the floor next to Thomas, widened her eyes. I hope you don't mind me saying it, McCormick continued, but it revealed a lot about what kind of community we are. This war had taken a toll on all of us, but we remained the type of people who would welcome a stranger and do our best to make her comfortable. You did a better job than I was expecting, said Shannon, a comment which raised a few smiles. She then offered a moment of eye contact with Ewan and a discreet grin. Perhaps all was well. An hour passed before McCormick brought the conversation to a close. He took a step forward, deeper into the crowd, and straightened his back. And just like that, the group knew the discussion was over. Half an hour from now, he began, we'll be leaving Spitfire's Rise. Before we say our final goodbyes to the house, we should establish who will be going where. My route into New London has space for 4 people. I need 3 of you on comms, and that just leaves the other 4 to find us a new home. Simon held up 3 fingers, a confused expression on his face. Yes, replied McCormick, 3 on comms. 2 to communicate and 1 to guard. This house isn't the only place those clones might remember, but we can't move all our resources from the comms unit in time for this mission. For better or worse, the comms team will be stuck there. Now, he said, with his arms spread wide across the room, I'm about to ask for strike team volunteers. Before I do, make no mistake, this is by far the riskiest mission we have ever undertaken. We're going to several locations across the northern wall of New London, some of which are on floor B. To date, we've never been higher than floor F. The mathematician in me says the odds are stacked overwhelmingly against us, even though the human in me still has faith. So before volunteering, you should know there's no shame in wanting to sit this one out. If I had a choice, I would. You do have a choice, you stupid old man, Ewan thought, feeling immediately guilty for the insult crossing his mind. It's your own stubbornness that's telling you to charge your 64-year-old body into a war zone just for the sake of leading from the front. Ewan was one of 5 people to raise his hand. Lorraine, Thomas, Shannon, Simon and Gracie kept theirs down, to the surprise of no one. Jack, Mark and Alex had their hands up, the latter highest of all. Kate, who had avoided the whole discussion as far as Ewan could tell, raised hers too. Okay, began McCormick. Ewan, the 2 of us are certainties. Mark, I want you to be the one guarding comms. If the clones come, I honestly believe you put up the best defence. Thanks, sir, said Mark with a very deliberate huff. Alex, I'm assuming you're volunteering in order to get revenge. That's not a good idea. It's strategy, Alex replied. I'm not a complete numpty. Unless they get up close, nobody will even know I'm human. And thanks to Ewan's bad shaving, I'm safe from you guys shooting me too. McCormick left a pause, his faint nod giving away his answer in advance. All right, I won't argue. And Jack, if you're up for it, you're in. Sorry, Kate, but I think you need more time to get over Raj, Kate barked, as if McCormick had brought her suddenly and painfully to life. Just to make this clear, I will never get over Raj, just like I never got over what's happened to James or my parents. Just like none of us have got over anything. My hand is up because Raj died to make this mission happen. We're using the information he gave his life for, and I won't insult him by sitting out. It was difficult to read the reaction on McCormick's face, but the length of his pause spoke volumes. In all fairness, added Jack, if you want to find a suitable home, you'll need an analytical person with close attention to detail. I'm cut out for that, and Kate's probably better than me in combat anyway. If she really wants it, I'll stand aside. Thanks, Jack, said Kate before McCormick could give his own answer. The man shrugged and gave a small nod of his head. Fine, he answered. Shannon, Lorraine, I want you 2 on comms with Mark guarding. Shannon's got the best knowledge of Grant's upper floor, and Lorraine... I wonder if that's a typo. You should probably say upper floors. You know what? Yeah, I'll make a note of that.
Okay.
Page 1. 5. Because once in a while, this book has a reprint, and once in a while, I find a typo that's been undiscovered for like 4 years. So here it is. So, got it. Shannon, Lorraine, I want you 2 on comms with Mark guarding. Shannon's got the best knowledge of Grant's upper floors, and Lorraine, well, you know why. The rest of you, follow Jack as he searches for a new home. Try to find one with comfy beds, okay? McCormick's last joke fell on deaf ears. The remaining underdogs raced to their feet and prepared to evacuate. 10 minutes to departure. McCormick dragged his legs behind him into the attic. It was time to say goodbye to Barbara again. This time, probably for good. Even if he were lucky enough to survive tomorrow's hellfire, it wouldn't be Polly's house he'd come back to. He rose to his knees and found his box of memories straight ahead next to the boiler. But, first things first, there was something in the attic that would have to go wherever the underdogs went. He reached to his left, opened the thin box of sealed envelopes, and started to flip through them. It was probably several months ago that we last referred to the envelopes, but yeah. Jack, Mark, Simon, Gracie, Shannon. The 6th envelope in the pile, the one he had flipped through to find, sank his heart. Raj. McCormick took the envelope in both hands and tore it to pieces. The information inside had been for Raj's eyes only, now to be left unread forever. He stuffed the remains into the pocket of his combat uniform, planning to dispose of them somewhere along the journey. The River Lee would churn them up well. With one less envelope in the thin box, he crawled over to his favourite part of Spitfire's rise. When he removed the aged photo frame from his memory box, Barbara McCormick's smile seemed to have grown. This isn't goodbye, Barbara, he began. I'm just moving house again, like I did from Durham. Only this time, my physical memories won't be joining me. McCormick smiled at the realisation that he was talking he was talking to a photo. But that was okay. He had spent 3 years not minding. Tomorrow I'll be heading to New London. Only the second time I've ever been. And you know what, Barbara? There's a chance I might actually come back. I'm prepared for the worst, but I'm hoping for the best. I don't think my work's done yet. There was a moment of heartbreak as McCormick thought about what his work truly meant. He had used a lifetime of experience to build up his housemates to be the best versions of themselves they could be, and he had also led 2/3 of them to their deaths. Then again, he could have just let them stay at home and wait to die, like the group Shannon and Lieutenant Lambourne had found in the clinic. But either way, he finished, I hope you know about your part in all this. I was never leadership material. It took the most wonderful woman in the world to turn this adult male into a man. And I hope I'm living my life in a way that honours what you did. You deserve my best, and I hope I'm giving it. McCormick? Came a child's laugh from the top of the ladder. McCormick bit his lip. Hello, Thomas. They're waiting for you downstairs. I'm coming. How much did you hear? Something about needing a woman to make you a man? What does that even mean? McCormick smiled, mainly with relief. I was just talking to myself, he answered, about my wife. She turned me into the person I am. Before I met her, I was just a kid in an adult's body. There was a laugh, followed by a noise on the floorboard beside him. Thomas, uninvited, had joined him in the clinic. Even though she died too early, he continued, her influence lives on in the people she loved. And she changed me for the better, little by little, all the way up to the day she died. She sounds awesome. She was, answered McCormick with a hearty laugh. Really, really awesome. I hope... Thomas's voice trailed off. When McCormick looked over at him, he had sealed his mouth shut. You hope what? Nothing. It wasn't nothing, Thomas. Okay, Thomas started, his voice trembling. He seemed to already feel guilty for the words that would come. I was about to say that I hope Mum did that to Dad before they split up. I know they hated each other by the end, but I hope she changed him for the better too. Thomas began to shake, and McCormick knew why. He had known Beth well enough to know why. Thomas knew he had said something good, but his upbringing had restricted his freedom of thought. He was not supposed to talk about his parents' breakup, and it must have been drilled into him from before takeover day. His mother had even complained about their last name still being Foster. If the divorce lawyers had been quicker, her son would have started the war with his real name. Nonetheless, Beth's overprotection had never stopped her son from saying kind words. That's a very mature thing to say, Thomas. Really? The boy asked with genuine surprise. Yes, and you know what? I'm going to trust you with something. Brushing his memory box out of Thomas's line of sight, he drew the boy's attention to the thin box of envelopes. He pushed them over and lay a soft hand on Thomas's shoulder. Wherever our new home is, take these with you. McCormick watched Thomas's face as he... New paragraph, by the way. McCormick watched Thomas's face as he stood among the crowd in the cellar, at the front so that he could see the memorial wall one last time. The boy had been uncomfortable with the reason behind McCormick's instructions, but he had understood. We'll never be properly home unless we take the whole family with us, said Jack. You're welcome to carry it if you want, replied Mark. McCormick adjusted his helmet for the fourth time that minute. It's been a long time since he had last needed to wear one, and it would take the whole evening before he had acclimatized to the feel of it again. He stood in place in front of the memorial wall and held out his hands. Everyone ready for this? Wordless, the Underdogs linked hands, and McCormick began. To honour those who gave everything they had, we will give everything we have. To honour the dead, we will free the living, united by our differences. United, answered the group. McCormick had expected a subdued, saddened response, but instead his friends were loud. Evidently, they were taking the opportunity to make their last meeting before the memorial wall mean something. One by one, the crowd started to leave. Some were carrying weapons, others were carrying food. Nobody could carry the generator, so they left behind everything that would require electricity. Their standard of living was set to dip dramatically. Before Jack walked out with a rucksack full of batteries, McCormick noticed the thermal blocker in his hand, the miniature football-sized objects which kept their body heat off any scans Grant could perform. Ewan's father had stolen it from his barracks on takeover day, and that impulsive act had kept them alive for a year. It was by far the most important piece of luggage carried by any of the crew, including all their weapons combined. McCormick kept himself at the back of the group and was the last person to leave Spitfire's rise. Thank you, Polly, he whispered into the air, before he walked into the tunnel, took a final look at the memorial wall, and closed the door behind him. End of chapter 13.
Okay. Um, so this chapter it wasn't really action packed. It was more of an emotional one, I'd say.
Mm, yeah,
Um,
calm and sad and emotional, which yeah, I like to mix things up. For every guns blazing explosions action chapter, there needs to be one that makes you cry for different reasons.
that makes sense. I love the exchange between McCormick and Thomas.
Mm,
It was cute. It was really cute.
yeah.
But then I really wanted to know, and I think I'm going to keep thinking about it. What was
Mhm.
in the letter, Raj's letter? I still need to, like, is there any way we could find out?
Well, all I'd say is that if an author references an object twice in the book and leaves a
Mhm.
deliberate mystery to it, it'll be very bad writing if that question doesn't get answered. So whether or not you find out what's in Raj's letter, obviously not saying anything,
Mhm.
but what the envelopes are about, yes, that does get answered.
Okay, okay. So that still leaves Raj's letter out, though.
Yeah, well, Raj's letter is now ripped to shreds,
Yeah.
but you at least
All
get to
right,
find
that
out
makes
just
sense.
generally what they're about.
What they're about. Okay, perfect. That sounds good.
Now, question is, do we have time for another chapter?
What do you say?
I'd say maybe if you want, let me let's check if I've got. Yeah, right. Yeah, that should be fine. Because think about the dinner that's cooking in there, but it's fine.
Mhm. Okay,
Okay. So chapter 14, and yeah, my main
let's
reason
start.
for wanting to read chapter 14 is because the book has 28 chapters in it, and then we could be exactly halfway through.
Perfect. Let's start.
Okay. So, chapter 14. Kate had been close to the same house 48 hours earlier. She had been sitting on a patch of grass less than half a mile away, at the top of a hill next to her boyfriend and her 5 fellow students. If she'd known McCormick would bring her back to Oakenfold, perhaps she wouldn't have volunteered after all. The man lay next to her on the sofa at that moment, catching some sleep while he could. It was already gone midnight. Oakenfold Special School lay at the end of the street, silent and empty. Not even a buzz to suggest there was an active shield surrounding it. It was the perfect trap, invisible, indestructible, and already proven to be fatal. 2 men in dark navy uniforms appeared not far from the house. Kate retrieved her weapon, but on closer inspection, they were just who she had hoped. Ewan and Alex had returned from their search for clone uniforms. Okay, Ewan whispered as he walked through the front door and passed around another 2 sets of clothes. There's yours, there's McCormick's. I think we're set. Do we seriously think this will work? Asked Kate, looking down at the uniform being handed to her. It must have belonged to one of the clones Simon had shot during their escape. Not that the disguise would serve much purpose, since Nicholas Grant had never produced a female clone before. We've at least got a chance, answered Alex. Besides, it's May 19th now. 24 hours from the AME shield going up. Any risks are acceptable. It wasn't quite the answer Kate wanted, but she could hardly choose not to accept it. Did you see Raj? Ewan looked at Alex. They were both noticeably uncomfortable. There's not much left to see, said Ewan. I won't bother. Won't do you any good. That was the answer Kate had wanted. She had needed to ask the question to stop it from bouncing around in her skull, and now she knew there was no need to go to the entrance and look for herself. She lay down on the living room floor and rested the blanket over herself. The shield's still up, Alex said to her. So if you were thinking of stealing some more research, Kate shook her head. In front of her, Ewan was doing the same. They're not going to bring the shield down unless they absolutely have to, Ewan said. Which they will once they start hauling the research back to New London. Anyway, any idea how much sleep we're likely to get? Not that any of us will actually sleep, Kate thought. Literally no idea at all, said McCormick, who seemed to have awoken out of nowhere. The supply trucks could arrive at any time. Safe to say they'll be gone before the evening, though. Even with all the machines they'll be loading? Kate asked. No, they won't be transporting much besides paper. The only bits of hardware here are the border points, which are useless without the laptop mark destroyed. And the electricity generators in the sports hall are just normal generators, nothing to do with AME research. It won't take long to pack up everything and transport it to New London. Or to some mystery location away from New London where their secret backup is? Alex mumbled. The research we stole made no mention of off-site backups, McCormick said, which means they either think New London's secure enough by itself or there's something physically stopping them. In my opinion, it's clearly the latter. But either way, it's good news for us. Everything's in New London. And once we get there, we've got, 5 targets? Asked Ewan, who must have already known the answer, but wanted the reassurance of knowing he was right. Yes, replied McCormick, 5. The central research headquarters on floor F, for starters. Also the data servers on floor P, since they'll have all their internal backups. And the paper archive on floor R. There's also the experiment chamber, also on floor F, which will hold the last physical traces of research. And Ian Marshall's computer, on floor B. The silence that followed was painful. Kate could hear the soft wind blowing outside, and even that felt haunting. And you chose this particular mission to be your first visit to New London since before Christmas, said Alex. You didn't even do much the other time you were there. I did more than you think. Oh, Alex continued, and one really important bit of advice. Make sure you listen to this. If you come up against an enemy, don't try to convert them, right? Don't try to see the good in them or bring them under your wing or win them over with love or... Shut up, Alex, Kate said. No, he needs to hear this. Everyone in the building, from Oliver Roth to clone number 1 million whatever, would be trying to kill you to death. Oliver Roth, muttered Ewan as he knelt down and prepared his own blanket. Bumping into that ginger git will be the icing on the cake. Yeah, we'll wait until after we've won, okay? If you're looking forward to getting killed, get the timing right. Oh, it'll be me killing him. He's got it coming. It's karma. Ah, yes, karma, said McCormick. Lots of people say they believe in karma. Most of them just believe in revenge. That's one of my favourite lines of the series, actually. Lots of people say they believe in karma, but most of them just believe in revenge. Anyway, I think it's time for a change of subject.
Sorry, you can continue. I was just going to say, it's actually really true. Most of the time, it's always about the revenge.
Yeah, and if you doubt it, how often do we talk about good karma? I don't think we do.
We don't. No.
We just talk about karma coming for people. Anyway, I think it's time for a change of subject. Serious discussion, please. Kate felt relief and concern at the same time. As much as she welcomed the change of subject, McCormick never used the word serious unless he meant it. McCormick rolled over on his sofa and reached into Ewan's rucksack of gadgets. When his hand emerged, it held a cigar-shaped metal casing. It was difficult to see much of it in the darkness, but Kate could tell it was elaborate enough to have been stolen from the British military. Perhaps it had been one of those devices there stolen from the barracks and kept in Spitfire's unnoticed for a year. McCormick pressed a button that opened the casing and revealed a screen that displayed 6 blank digits, along with a miniature numbered keypad and a large clear button at the top. Let me guess, started Ewan. You brought along some plastic explosives and you want us to plant them somewhere important, then use that as a remote detonator. Almost. We're out of plastic explosives, sir. I checked today before we started packing. McCormick smiled. Mine were planted several months ago. Kate, Ewan and Alex looked around at each other, as if seeking guidance on how to react. Where? Asked Kate. Well, I can't tell you where, McCormick answered, because this could change the course of the war. We cannot let the information fall into the wrong hands. Knowledge of its location is restricted to myself and Lorraine, since someone at comms needs to be in the loop. Why not Shannon? Asked Ewan. Because Lorraine was on comms when I planted them in December. Like I said, I did more than you think last time I went to New London. While Mark, Sally and Rachel were sabotaging the munitions factory, I was laying explosives in a nice sensitive place. It could cripple Grant's empire for a good couple of weeks if it ever detonated. Hold on, said Alex with a mocking laugh. So nobody noticed you carrying a man-sized pile of explosives into the Citadel? I only needed a fistful. I used NPN-8. Another hush fell over the strike team. Seriously? NPN-8? Whatever he's planning, it better be worth it. Oh, by the way, NPN-8 isn't real. I just made it up, but let's go with it. NPN-8 was by far the most powerful plastic explosive available to the military. Kate remembered how Ewan had once described it to her in 2 sentences. Use C4 if you want to blow the lock off a door. Use NPN-8 if you want the room to stop existing. So it's small enough not to be noticed, finished McCormick. I have no doubt that half a year on, it's in the same place I left it. Why haven't you detonated it before now, just to be safe? Kate asked. Well, that's the problem with explosives. You only get to use them once. I've been waiting for an occasion like this, one on which the whole war depends. Now, I need a volunteer. And with apologies for being frank, it should be the one among you who's likely to live the longest. How diplomatic, thought Kate. Well, I grew up eating my beans and not smoking. eating my greens and not smoking, said Alex. My life expectancy is probably in its 80s. Be sensible, Alex. And your life expectancy will be a lot lower if you're planning to go off on your own again. All right, I vote Kate. She sat up straight, alarmed. Why? She asked. Because Ewan will have half of New London after him, and I'm screwed the moment they realise I'm not a clone. I'm guessing McCormick wants the volunteer to hold on to the detonator and only use it when absolutely necessary. And let's face it, you're the most careful one of us. No, said McCormick. I don't want Kate holding this. Kate gasped, conflicting thoughts fighting inside her mind. On the one hand, a scary responsibility would no longer be hers. On the other hand, why the hell would McCormick deny her the opportunity? The man had spent his whole life using responsibility as a tool to build up young people, so it seemed out of character for him. Why not? She asked, a little too loud. Because you might end up having to use it. Just trust me. I vote Kate too, said Ewan. Kate began to wonder whether she was truly opposed to the responsibility. Her friend's encouragement seemed to be changing her mind. At her side, McCormick's resistance was fading. I'll be giving you the most powerful explosive device this war has ever known, he said weakly. It's a good job you trust me then, isn't it? McCormick let out a long sigh, the kind of sigh people resorted to when they knew they were beaten. If our situation becomes unsalvageable, he said, I'll give you the 6-digit code. Ideally, this won't happen. The plan is to get inside, destroy the shield's control system, wipe out every single bit of research down to the last post-it note, and, if possible, get out and go home. Wherever home ends up being, said Alex. Yeah, get out and go home. And if we can do all that without needing a big explosion, we'll save this weapon for another time. You'll give me the detonator back and we'll never speak of this again. But if I do give you the code, if our strike goes so badly that we need to take this kind of action, you must follow my instructions to the letter. Because this is the one weapon in our arsenal that we absolutely can't afford to waste. Okay, muttered Kate, I get it. McCormick nodded and sighed as he took the detonator back into the rucksack. When we get inside, he finished, take it out of here and look after it well. Even with the limited light available, Kate could see the sadness in McCormick's face. There had never been a figure in her life who had held so much faith in her as McCormick, but just for once it felt like he didn't believe in her. Not for this task, anyway. Not it matters, she thought. I'd be surprised if even one of us survives tomorrow. McCormick's an old man. Alex has had Grant messing around inside his head. I've got Raj's death affecting my judgment. Anyone claims to be strong-minded and independent, but he's useless without support from people he cares about. Between the four of us, I don't see any potential survivors.
That's a very sad statement.
Oh, Kate's a bit of a realist. An anxious realist, but a realist. Okay, second half of the chapter. It was Shannon's third consecutive night in the Boys' Brigade attic, having only had a daytime's break between the Oakenfold mission ending and New London beginning. She had become used to the dark and dingy nature of the Underdogs comms unit, and this time the company wasn't much brighter. Mark was stood downstairs near the entrance, using a tiny window on the front wall as a vantage point to watch for possible invaders. And next to her in the attic, Lorraine sat unsmiling next to a cold mug of tea. Lorraine had changed over the course of the week, or maybe hidden parts of her personality were becoming visible as times became more desperate. The uncompromising but loving nurse who had greeted her at Spitfire's Rise 3 weeks earlier had become a harsh, openly wounded figure. By operating on McCormick, perhaps she had altered something inside herself too. Shannon didn't know whether Lorraine would allow a well-meaning conversation or dismiss it hurtfully, but it was worth a try. The silence in the attic was nothing short of painful. Did I ever thank you, asked Shannon, for taking care of me when I arrived? I didn't do it to be thanked. Her voice was gruff, but not unkind. Well, thank you anyway. You're welcome. The answer might have been genuine. Shannon didn't get the impression Lorraine was trying to shut her up, but she was uncomfortable with the unenthused, generic responses, which suggested that Lorraine didn't value her own place in the group as much as she deserved to. You're allowed to be proud of what you do, you know. Lorraine shot her a glance that was halfway between disbelief and offence. And what makes you think I'd be proud? You saved lives. Remember the last trip to New London? You treated Alex and Kate's gunshot wounds, and even Ewan would be dead from infection if you hadn't. I know the importance of what I do, Lorraine answered in a condescending voice. But pride isn't something I'm into. I do what I do out of duty, not to feel good about myself. Lorraine's tone gave Shannon the temptation to drop the subject altogether, but she couldn't. Can't you at least be happy that you save lives? Happiness doesn't come into it either. Shannon had seen miserable people. There had not been one happy human in the whole of New London's outer city, including herself. But even so, she felt hurt by Lorraine's refusal to even consider positive thought. "How can you think like that?" she asked. Lorraine paused and took a sip of her cold tea. For a moment it was unclear whether she would respond at all, but eventually she did. "Shannon," she asked, "do you believe that the world is a beautiful place?" Shannon paused. "No," she answered honestly. "People get to know me and assume I'm the same. Truth is, I do believe the world is beautiful, and I thank God every day for what we have." Shannon looked at her, confused. "Yes," Lorraine continued, "I'm a believer. I'm not a shout it from the rooftops believer like Raj was, although I used to be. These days, though, it's difficult for me to talk about religious faith when I see the world's ugliness more than anything else." "But you just said that the world is beautiful, and it is. But I don't see that beauty the way I used to." Shannon looked around the attic and imagined the remains of Great Britain beyond it. When she thought about it, Lorraine's words were unsurprising. "I was a teaching assistant once," Lorraine said, "before my 20 years as a nurse. Worked with 11-year-olds mostly. Towards the end, I worked one-to-one with a boy called Joey Shetland. He had the kind of childhood that involved social workers, and the police once in a while. He didn't have the best start to life, and worst of all, he knew that he hadn't. Even as a child, he hated himself." Shannon nodded. She understood. But there was an extra layer of self-loathing backed up by his parents. His mum didn't want him to grow up to be useless like his dad, and his dad told him he'd grow up to be evil like his mum. So obediently, he believed them. Lorraine paused, either for dramatic effect or to prepare herself for the rest of the story. Shannon suspected the latter. "I did some great things for Joey, and yes, I was happy about it. I was even proud. But halfway through year 6, he started talking about killing himself. Imagine it, Shannon, wanting death at the age of 11. I know, right? Shannon thought. I was at least 14. It wasn't truly death that he wanted. He just wanted the bad thoughts gone from his head. Long story short, I helped him deal with his issues. He reached the end of the year in one piece, and when he finished juniors, his family moved away." Shannon breathed a sigh of relief, but Lorraine interrupted her mid-smile. "Within 3 months, Joey was dead, a week after his 12th birthday. I won't tell you how." Lorraine's breathing pattern changed, as if fighting back tears. "He wrote 2 suicide notes. One to his family, telling them everything they had done wrong to him. The other was for me, of all people. Their teacher gave me the day off for his funeral, and that's where Joey's mother passed me the letter. It was still sealed, so she hadn't peeked. Come to think about it, that was probably the only decent decision I remember her making. I read it at home. He didn't even try to explain why. He only wrote 2 sentences. 'I'm so sorry, Mrs. Shepherd. I just couldn't do it.'" A bunch of Shannon's own memories resurfaced in her mind. Hearing Joey's story whilst dealing with her own background was no easy task. "It taught me the hardest lesson I've ever had to learn," Lorraine continued. "You can move heaven and earth to help people, but some things are beyond your power. I couldn't save Joey because I couldn't change his decisions. The only way to help people is if they let you, and not everyone will." Lorraine let out a cough and took a moment to steady her breathing. Shannon had no idea what to say, if anything at all, but it seemed like the hardest part of the story was over. "I couldn't go back into the classroom after that," Lorraine continued. "Then I figured if I was in the life-saving industry, I might as well go the whole hog and train as a nurse. A 12-year-old's death dragged me into a world where people die around me all the time, however hard I tried. The work was difficult. My husband and daughter had to suffer my moods when I came home at night, but I did a lot of good for a lot of people. So in my head, it was worth it." By the end of Lorraine's monologue, most of Shannon's words had vanished from her mind. Only one sentence remained, and she spoke it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because God may have created a beautiful world, but we've made it bloody ugly. The way we treat each other, the things we do to ourselves, the way we neglect the sick and needy, human actions make everything ugly. So to be honest, I don't have high standards for happiness anymore. I'm not here to make the world a beautiful place, Shannon. It's already beautiful when we stop hurting ourselves and each other. I'm here to reduce this world's ugliness, not increase its beauty." Shannon had no words in response. Lorraine picked up her mug and drank the rest of her tea all in one. "And by allowing McCormick to go to New London," she finished, "I'm afraid that I might have added to the world's ugliness." End of chapter 14. Halfway through the book.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, that was possibly the least, possibly the most uncomfortable chapter of the 3 there, but it's Lorraine's a character who we get to know as a bit of a grumpy, uncompromising nurse, but yeah, that's her background.
And So going through the last two paragraphs and the Lorraine's monologue is just
Yeah.
it shows a lot of what's happening in the world right now. You know
Mm.
how
Yeah.
ugly we've
Any,
made everything and everything that's happening.
yeah, it's kind of echoes my personal beliefs as well. I would not phrase my beliefs in the same way that Lorraine does, obviously, but
Hmm.
I do also believe that God has created a beautiful world and humans have made it bloody ugly.
That's true.
And yeah, and yeah, I don't I don't want to say the problem is humanity because then it starts talking like Nicholas Grant and yeah. Actually, wait. Come to think of it, I'm not going to go any further because I just realised that what I just said isn't going to make complete sense until you reach the end of Tooth and Nail. So I won't be
Okay,
saying much
so
more. Because,
all right,
yeah.
that gives us something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm. And to let you know what you're in for in chapter 15, surprisingly, chapter 15 is a Jack chapter.
Okay.
With because he, of course, is leading the charge to try and find a new Spitfire's rise. And hold on. Oh yeah, it's also a Ewan chapter, so it's yeah. And yeah, so we got half a chapter of Jack trying to find a new house, and the second half of the chapter is going back to Ewan and what is basically the start of the second half of the book's action. I would say starts the final showdown, but does it count as a final showdown if it takes up half the book? I don't know, but
No,
it's pretty much
no.
non-stop from there.
So there would be a bit of an action phase at the end
It's
of the
it's
chapter.
they've got to get inside first, but
Okay. All right.
yeah, it won't be long until it's all guns blazing in action again.
Well, I'm
Right.
excited to find out.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Does
Right.
anyone have any questions to ask Chris? I know Steph has been a regular commenter, and just like, but thank you so much, Chris. This was a
Yeah, likewise.
this is something. This was something, honestly, and
Yeah, I'm glad I was able to
and
write chapters like this rather than be good at writing action and then rubbish at writing all the stuff in between. But yeah,
no, I
that's how
think
intense girls can get without a shot fired.
you have a perfect balance of writing about everything. You know, there's
Thank you.
emotional element, there is action, there's just a lot of it, and it's all in a perfect balance. You know,
Well, thank
that's
you.
that's wonderful. That's amazing.
Awesome. Right. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you presumably towards the end of August.
Yes,
Cool.
towards the end of August.
All right. See you then.
That's right. All right. Thank you so much, Chris. Take care. Stay
All right.
safe,
Bye.
and we'll see you
And you.
soon. Thank you. Bye bye.